I would like to welcome on the stage Mr. Tomoo Machiba, a policy expert from the Green Development Department from the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment in the UAE, to moderate our second session along with our panelists, Mr. Scott Kennedy, Executive Director, Energy Action Partners Assistant Director at MIT, Mr. Aouini, Inventor, Co-founder and Chairman of Saphon Energy, and Dr. Noura Mansouri, Senior Research Associate at the King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Studies in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and Mr. Simon Bushell, co-founder and CEO of SimPower, who I believe is still in one of the panel sessions, so he will join us right after. Please welcome all on the stage for our coming session titled Innovation and in the Developing World, from Humble Beginnings to the Global Impact. Once again, we will open the floor for questions and discussion at the end of the session, and microphones are available and provided. We kindly ask you all to please mention your name, designation, country at the time of speaking. And thank you. Over to you, Mr. Tomoo.
My name is Tomoo Machiba. I'm working for the UAE Ministry of Climate Change and Environment. And our Director of Green Development, Aisha Abdullah, who gave the welcome speech, and she has to apologize this afternoon due to the urgent matter. And instead, let me take over the facilitator role. And yeah, this kind of final session, and we welcome all of you to Dubai, and I hope that you are enjoying the stay so far. And this second but last this session, it's all about innovation, and especially UAE and everything about innovation, like you see in these titles. But also innovation is quite vague concept, and because of it's so intangible, and you cannot tell how innovation happens, one A to B. So this is kind of a unique concept, but also we need a lot of expertise and to discuss about this subject. And before introducing the panelists, let me briefly introduce about what UAE is doing about innovation. And as I said, innovation is quite huge things in this country, and especially end of 2014, and the UAE launched a national innovation strategy, and which aiming to position the country among the world's most innovative nations by 2021. And this strategy focuses on the especially 7 sectors: renewable energy, transport, education, health, technology, water, and space. And following year 2015 was designated as the year of innovation. And since then, annually, this country has a National Innovation Week. And actually, the next year, it's going to be the Innovation Month, and even bigger than the week. And also, in terms of green economy and the innovation, also in the heart of the UAE Green Agenda 2030, actually the first of the 12 Green Agenda programs is a National Green Innovation Program, which supports the development of environmental goods and services and green entrepreneurs. Also, recently, we launched a National Climate Change Plan. This plan also dedicates one of the 3 pillars to the private sector-driven innovation diversification program. And the most advanced area of the innovation in this country is, of course, the renewable energy. And especially the Dubai, developing this Dubai Green Funds with hopefully having a $27 billion US funding. Then first part of this Green Fund was just announced yesterday with national bonds, which is great. And on the federal level, the mechanism to drive innovation is the Government Accelerator Program, which try to develop the project, deliver the project with concrete results within a matter of 100 days. One of the examples which our ministry is working with Emirates Global Aluminium is we kind of worked on the project to reduce nitrogen oxide emissions from the power plants of the Emirates Global Aluminium. And we achieved within 100 days and reducing this NOx emission by 16%. This is equivalent to removing the 450,000 cars from the UAE road. And also, our ministry is currently organizing a series of innovation lab to explore the innovative idea for realizing sustainable consumption production. And the first series of the innovation lab, and we worked with materials manufacturers as a producers, and also construction and real estate company as a consumers. So we came up with an innovative idea how to solve this material production and the consumption aspect through the innovation ideas. And we also worked on the different sectors such as transport and food and agriculture in the coming months. So let me introduce the panelists one by one, and starting from the Anis, Aouini, and he's from the Tunisia. He's the famous innovator in the country, and he's the chairman and the co-founder of the Saphon Energy and Tire Energy. Also, he's founder and the chairman of the Heptair Marine. And especially he's inventing in the wind converter and also marine propulsion systems. And so can you explain a little bit about your innovation and how you came up with these technologies and how you developed this process first?
So first of all, I want to thank you to this invitation to attend the World Green Economy Summit 2017. And for that, I want to salute this beautiful city of Dubai, where we are here today. So today, when we talk about wind converter, wind energy, many people can imagine or can see this big wind turbine, this big machine with bladed rotor to convert wind energy into electricity. But there is 5 other alternatives, 5 other technologies around the world, which are considered today as an alternative to the conventional one. So 2 of these 5 technologies come from emerging economy, come from Africa, and come from Tunisia. And I am an inventor of both technologies. So the first is called Saphon. It's inspired from sailboat. It's bladeless one, exempted from blade and rotation free also. The second is called the tire wind converter. It's a biomimic one. It's inspired from hummingbird, which is today our flagship in our company, flagship product. So today I can introduce to you quickly this new wind converter launched from emerging country, which is my case, Tunisia, my country. So tire wind is a new way to convert wind energy into electricity. So it's a radical, innovative solution which has been created based on biomimicry. Biomimicry is how to inspire from nature or mimic nature to create a new technological concept, which is a new philosophy now used in Silicon Valley, for example, in US or in Japan or in Europe. So this new solution called a tire wind is a biomimics wind converter inspired from the famous hummingbird. You know the hummingbird, the colibri. So it's the most efficient bird on our Earth. Okay? And many studies around the world has been concentrated on this bird called the hummingbird for his efficiency, high efficiency, and it's compared to best helicopter worldwide, and it's confirmed that it has a better efficiency. So for that, this new machine is completely different compared to the conventional wind turbine with bladed rotor, and this conventional wind turbine is not able today to overcome some drawbacks or some limits. For example, regarding the problem with avifauna, or the problem with radar, military and civil radar disruption. We can also add some drawbacks, like, for example, low landscape integration. So tire wind is, bladeless wind converter is based on new technology, but old philosophy, which is oscillating wings converter. Oscillating wings converter. So it's bladeless, it's rotation free. So this technology has many advantages. For example, elegance, economics, efficiency, and ecology. Why? Because it's a biomimics technology. So we can add quickly something. So it's the first time in the history, it's the first time in mechanical human since Abbas ibn al-Furnas, our great engineer, Arab engineer, or since Leonardo da Vinci, human mechanic can today mimics the articulation of winged bird. So we walk on the moon. Today we talk about virtual reality, we talk about maybe cloud computing, Internet of Things, and we are not able until now to mimic the wing motion. So it's the first time in the history. Second thing, that tire wind technology, and my company Tire Wind, has been invited for the first time as Arabic technology and African technology to be invited and showcased in World Expo organized in Astana last June. So it's the first time in the history that Arabian and African technology has been invited to global World Expo in Astana since 1851.
Yeah. Can you add some questions? How your technology is applied so far for the moment, and also how you get these biomimicry ideas? Idea came from the other countries, or you kind of like try to invent yourself, and how
No,
the
I
technology
think
is realized?
the secret is very simple. But, I just observe nature. So when we observe nature, because nature is proven now that nature is more efficient than that any concept invented by human. Okay? So when you observe nature and you take nature as inspiration source, it's very easy to develop something new and something inspired from nature to satisfy nature. So it's amazing.
Thank you very much. So next, let me introduce Dr. Scott Kennedy, and he's the Executive Director of Energy Action Partners, which is the international social enterprise working to strengthen communities through collaborative development of sustainable energy systems. Also, he's Assistant Director of Educational Initiative at MIT, also working on international cooperative program with the Mazda Institute of Science and Technologies. So can you explain about your work and also your past engagement with Mazda Institute and the current work going on with other countries?
Sure. Thank you. I'd like to thank the moderator, my fellow panelists, for joining me, and especially the audience for coming in the last session of the day. It's a privilege to be able to speak here at this conference in Dubai. So on innovation, the topic of innovation, I'll address it from two perspectives. So as the moderator mentioned, I've spent some time in the university setting looking at how to develop research-intensive universities. We had a long collaboration, 11 years now, between Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Boston, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the Mazda Institute here in Abu Dhabi, really trying from the ground up to create a very research-focused, entrepreneurial, relevant, innovative culture at a university that would address critical problems locally and regionally. In addition, and I'll probably actually start with the next, which is another activity has been to set up a social enterprise called Energy Action Partners, which really is, some innovation is not always a product. It may be around a process or looking at a system and how to improve that system. And what we've been focused on is how we can use energy transformation, looking at moving from conventional fossil fuels into renewable energy and expanding energy infrastructure as a means to fuel local or inclusive growth. And we have addressed this in a couple different ways. Some of the key missing ingredients in this system where we think we can hopefully provide an impact. One is whenever there's a technological transformation, there's a social adoption aspect that is important to address. And what we've been focusing on there is more in the rural off-grid energy access market. And we find that initially, just the initial provision of infrastructure gets you one step along the way. but the governance of these energy systems, particularly off-grid, if it's not well structured, it leads to many failures. There can be theft of electricity, poor maintenance, lack of ability or interest in maintaining. And as anyone who works in this sector knows, there are many legacy systems of solar, diesel, wind, renewable systems that are left rusting because they've been abandoned. One activity that we've addressed is how you localize the governance, not necessarily the ownership or operation, but governance of the system with the end users. So we have an effort, this is based out of Malaysia, where we focused in energy access in Southeast Asia. We've developed a game approach. And so what this essentially is you turn the energy design process of a microgrid into a participatory game, a collaborative game, where you could work with people in policy, but particularly work on communities that are interested in achieving energy access, and play through scenarios of how the grid will operate. So we will look at issues around pricing, demand-side management, address many of the socio-technical challenges around microgrid deployment, and then use the knowledge of the community and their own practices and institutions to design pricing, demand-side management, capacity sizing issues with direct input from the community. I'll talk about that very briefly. I won't go into more detail, but essentially it's a way to localize the design and achieve more sustainable microgrid deployment, particularly in communities where there's a big transformation from maybe no energy or very limited energy supply into one where you're trying to provide a sustainable energy supply. The other area we work in this, where we think of energy development as a system, is in a different region. Our organization works in Somaliland, and we are interested in development of the solar sector there. There are some ingredients that are there, some are not. I appreciated there was a comment just at the end of the session about local capital and the private sector. I think it's essential to involve local capital in energy system in development, not just for the from the financial sense that the returns will be reinvested, but it's more sustainable in terms of the value provided to the society. And I'll give some examples. So in Somaliland, where we're working, one of our key challenges that we're facing is local technical capacity to build a team there. There's our work there so far has focused on the commercial sector for solar diesel mini grids, and we're charting a path forward where we're looking to install these PV diesel mini grids for small, medium enterprises to address the very high cost of electricity that they're facing. So in terms of the way we've organized our organization there is to have more of a bootstrapping approach, where we're starting with individual projects where we can scale down the project to attract local investment from the private sector, hotels, businesses, institutions that actually have access to local capital, that can afford smaller systems that will scale over time.
I want to have one question. It's like, especially the audience coming from the public sector. So it's like, where government and public sector fit in this local adaptation of the technologies? How you try to make a matching with public sectors and also local communities and the local entrepreneurs and the capitals.
So I would say that's very locally specific. So in our work in Somaliland, the access to public finance is very limited. So we're primarily focused on local capital, local investors, and then also a challenge there is the risk associated with these projects are very different from a local investor side. It's less, there's not the sort of business climate risk. I mean, they're used to their sector where they're working in their economic activity for that client. But there is some risk of understanding the technology and faith in the technology. And so one of our strategies, because we have a very intentional approach to try to involve local capital, is to work with diaspora communities. So diaspora investors that would like to invest in economic growth back at home are a good bridge. they have a slightly different risk profile than local private sector. And so we use this as a way to address sort of the unfamiliarity with technology or that risk with an investor is more likely to be familiar with the technology. So on for our particular context, the public finance is less available. We are beginning to work with some of the new banks in the region, but it's more with the private sector. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Scott. So last panelist is Dr. Noura Mansouri, and she is a senior research associate at King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center, and visiting scholar at MIT, and future energy leader at the World Energy Council also. Previously, she has served as the manager of strategy and marketing at Areva. So can you explain, like you are working on kind of new concept of blockchain in energy system, and can you explain about the audience about what you are working on?
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Global Green Growth Institute for hosting me. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank the audience for sticking around for the last session. So blockchain is one of these new technologies that we hear a lot about. It has been identified by the World Energy Council as the #1 uncertainty in the energy sector. So what is blockchain? From the name, it's a chain of blocks, and each block contains information that can't be modified, and it's secure, and it's transparent. So this powerful characterization of the technology offers so many solutions. So one application to the blockchain technology that you may be familiar with is the Bitcoin currency, the cryptocurrency. In essence, this enabling technology has the potential to cancel out banks, financial institutions, the utility sector, so the potential is huge. The blockchain technology I like to compare it to the internet. So the TCP/IP, which is the enabling technology, enabled the existence of the internet. And 2 decades later, we see the shared economy. We see companies like Amazon, Airbnb that completely changed the way we operate, the way we live our lives. The same way the TCP/IP enabled the creation of the internet, the blockchain also will enable the creation of so many applications in different industries. One is the Bitcoin in the financial sector, but also in the energy sector. So before things can completely transform, it will be some time for the technology to really penetrate and become socially acceptable and economically feasible. There are a few applications today. There's the LO3 Energy. They have a case study in Brooklyn, in New York, and they basically build a microgrid that enable consumers to become prosumers. So the rise of prosumers is another transforming factor where you as a user of energy, you're not just a consumer of energy, but you're also a producer of energy, and you are able to sell the excess energy that you produce back to the grid. So as you can imagine, the potential for this technology is huge, and it raises so many questions such as reliability, management of the grid, central authority. So I think it's a very interesting technology to assess and understand. And I think governments around the world should also invest in this technology and use it to their advantage. Because typically all centralized electricity systems are controlled by a central authority, which are held responsible in terms of managing the grid, managing the reliability of the grid, the prices of the electricity, etc. So once we have a technology like blockchain, all of this will change. And so the question is, will the authority allow this change to happen? Is it really a question of the authority allowing it to happen, or the authority jumping the bandwagon and actually participating in advancing this technology and making it work for the country. One interesting application that also ties in well with the theme of this panel is the application of blockchain in energy in rural areas, in off-grid locations. Just how rural Africa and rural India leapfrogged from in the telecom industry to completely wireless communication. The same way they can also leapfrog into wireless energy or energy that's completely decentralized. And I think that potential should be really explored for less developed countries and developing countries, especially in rural India. There are a few examples. I know a company that's based in the UK called Box, and they produce wireless products for the integration of renewable energy in off-grid locations. So they produce these devices that run on solar panels with a generator. And I know these rural villages, the villages in India, have a central station where they can charge their mobile phones and use electronic payments to pay for their bills. And it's just completely off-grid. And it's amazing to see this application. This is just a starting to start the conversation, and I'd like this to be very interactive as well.
Thank you, Noura, and thank you for sharing the very exciting development. And audience coming from the Middle East and Africa, so it's can you explain a little bit about potential application for this region, and this can be the next kind of mobile phone, and in the future, or what's the kind of potential challenge to be overcome? And maybe Scott also can be explain about how this kind of concept can be applied in Somaliland and other countries you are working in.
So there are about 2 billion people that have no access to energy, and I feel that the solution lies in energy innovation, technology innovation, and enabling this technology innovation to serve these disadvantaged group. As I mentioned, in one of the success stories are in the little villages in Africa and India that are really taken as case studies. And it's working. So they're using, I think this company that I was referring to earlier reached 100,000 households in rural India, basically retrofitting them with solar panels. And the users of the energy don't pay anything. It was completely covered through corporate social responsibility and other funding. Other funding models. So I think it's a great opportunity that companies take the initiative and governments take the initiative to support these kind of projects and allow basically those who are off-grid, who can't access energy, whether it's the physical barrier or even the financial barrier if it's too expensive. And utilize the free resource, the solar energy free resource, yes, harness it using these products.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I agree. Thank you for that. I agree with the idea of having blockchain as a potential platform for energy market transactions. I think there are two reasons that make that very interesting. One is areas that have a very high penetration of mobile payments. So clearly the kind of electronic payment system can base itself off of that existing infrastructure where people are very familiar with mobile payments. The other is this topology of a power sector where you have microgrids that are first disconnected, and then one vision is that eventually they will become interconnected. And so you have a different pathway for how you expand your infrastructure from traditional central generation and large transmission systems. As you do this, first as they're decentralized, you may not have one entity that manages those transactions, one utility company. You may have multiple. And so the decentralized infrastructure itself could utilize a decentralized financial system, which is what blockchain could enable. So transactions between users, not necessarily through a central market. The tractability of the transactions is very difficult without something like blockchain. I have an example. Unfortunately, it's not in that region, but there's an interesting company that we know in Bangladesh that has worked on first setting up solar DC microgrids where there are transactions between the households. When they have excess supply, their neighbor will buy from them. So it's a very decentralized, the company's called SoulShare. It's a very decentralized platform for the infrastructure, the generation, as well as the financial transactions. Many are particularly unique to the region. One reason why it works there is that you're off-grid, but you have a high-density population. So it's always important to think of what's the context. The reason that you have high-density population there is because it's on land that is very difficult to erect the large transmission system because of the very saturated soils. And so it's easier to have, when they've expanded their microgrids, they've expanded in these areas that typically are in riverways. The distribution system is difficult to erect there. So they have high density but decentralized or off-grid generation. So that unique combination leads to decentralized infrastructure and a decentralized transaction infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Let us move on more like a policy discussions. How government can drive innovation and to help getting the finances and the other kind of overcoming the different challenges. So Anis, and you work as an entrepreneur and inventors. What kind of challenge you face in terms of kind of policy support and also financing and so on and so forth? Then how government could potentially help and to develop your technology moving to the market?
So you mean the Tunisian government?
But yourself and what kind of challenge you face and what you wish to get the support from the government?
No, I will give you a big picture. So, as you know, the problems or the challenges we faced in Tier 1, for example, is common for all emerging countries. It's the same case for all emerging economies. So it's our case, for example, in Tunisia. It's not wrong. But we can, for example, we can classify these problems or these challenges in two levels or in two packages to more understand what is the problem. So first, I think it's regarding lack of money. It's normal. Lack of money, poor research and development infrastructure. We can add also, there is no mechanism to finance your innovative startup. So because the conventional mechanism prefer the pre-established model. And if they invest, they prefer to invest at the very advanced stage. So innovator, which is the big problem today for innovators. Why? Because the innovator need money, need investment to support his works regarding idea, regarding lab scale phase, regarding prototype phase. So there is no mechanism today, conventional mechanism, to support this phase. But maybe I think the second big challenge, which is the most dangerous, which constitute the real threat for innovators in our region, is related to the problem of culture. The real problem is the culture, because there is a serious lack of innovation culture in our region. Because when you innovate, you need a social culture, a culture implemented in your society, So, so it's our example, for example, for North Africa, for Tunisia, and maybe for all, it's the problem for all Arabo-Muslim world. So, and I think it's worth noting here, that in developed country, it's not in developed country and in developed economy, they experienced four industrial revolutions. Since 18th century, based on steam engine, until now. Now we talk about virtual reality, Internet of Things, cloud computing. So there is real trust has been built between innovator and decision maker, and innovator and people. For our case, in our region, for example, since we never come up with radical innovation, with breakthrough technology, maybe perhaps since 1492, since Middle Age. So we didn't have the chance to build a real trust or the mutual trust between decision maker and innovators, or innovators and people. So for that, we are noting now in our region, in developing country, we are noting this low level of self-confidence in our young people and in our young innovator. So I think the big problem is regarding culture.
Thank you, Anis. That's a unique point, but also, especially this country is really, leadership loving the, technologies. And last week, for instance, and there was an announcement of creating the Ministry of State for the Artificial Intelligence, which is the first in the world, I think. So how, this type of kind of creating the interest in the technologies, but also how to cultivate a culture actually getting an innovator from, this region, and how we can connect and, interest in this high tech, but also creating actual, human capital to innovate and new technologies from here. It's Scott. It's you're familiar with the Masda Institute and how Abu Dhabi is doing this.
I appreciate your comment about culture. I think if you're investing in R&D and you don't realize that you're actually trying to invest in creating a culture around innovation, then you're just trying to buy a product. That's not R&D. R&D is, especially if R&D is not, there's not a long history or a success at innovation in a region, you're really investing in creating a culture. But it's very hard to get someone to put down the investment for that. I think the way to address that, my personal bias is universities are really the key for incubating a culture that then diffuses outward into the private sector, into industry. And so that's that we have done. As I said before, around 11 years ago, MIT was involved with setting up the Masdar Institute. And again, we were very much focused on shifting the conversation from purchasing IP, buying a product, into investing in R&D, which is a much longer term prospect. I think sometimes the reluctance to invest in R&D, some of the things that we were challenged against was the expectation of quick returns and how innovation, how that translation of knowledge and research activity moves from the university out into society. There's sometimes a thought that, well, the major channel for innovation, creating value out of these new ideas is IP generation and purchasing of licensing, and this should be the main driver that a university, the main driver through which the university contributes to economic development. That's actually not the case. Even if we look at my home institution at MIT, there have been studies that have looked at what are the main channels by which the university creates economic impact. And actually, patenting is very low. It's less. There's been studies that put it at maybe 10 to 15% based on surveys of faculty and private sector that have interacted with the universities. A lot of the diffusion or that impact from the universities comes through engagement, either through students graduating, co-publishing papers with industry, consulting engagements that the faculty have. I like to think of it as diffusion as opposed to a transaction, right, in the way that the university impacts the economy through innovation. So to answer your question again, I think really the investment in R&D, I think that universities are really a nucleus for that activity. And I think a long-term vision is needed. And the recognition that you are changing mindsets, you're not just purchasing technology.
Thank you, Scott. Noura, do you have any additional perspectives? And you are working in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is also kind of seeking the kind of similar directions, but also something, and like other country can take back and from the lessons from this region.
Yeah, sure. I agree with Scott, and building up on what Scott was talking about, treating universities as the nucleus of innovation. It's the realization that innovation doesn't happen in isolation, and so looking at innovation as a system of innovation. I'll talk about the National System of Innovation Framework, which was, it started to diffuse in policy circles, I would say, towards the end of the 70s, and gaining more momentum, especially today. So National System of Innovation is looking at the country as a system of agents in the economy, the university being at the heart of it, but also the university's interaction with the industry and the industry's interaction with both the university and the government. So I'd like to give, as an example, Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030. So it's a vision that unites sort of and guides the activities in the economy. It's a clear vision that can be translated in different sectors. And so once you have this vision that unites everybody, there's a clear direction, or what I'd like to call sustainability pathway. And in this sustainability pathway, there are checklists that you need to, there are balances and checks that you need to work towards. Whether you're at a university or a company or a ministry or any kind of institution within the economy. Once there is a clear goal and a clear objective, then it can translate into innovation. And by innovation, I mean an invention or a new way of creation that is born typically in the science and engineering domain, and then it moves to the socioeconomic domain. And that pathway is what we talk about. It's the innovation pathway that governments need to support. And it's not just the government, because it's a two-way thing. It's a top-down approach, and that's the government's role, but it's also a bottom-up approach, and that's the scientists, innovators, entrepreneurs' role. To cultivate this culture of innovation is important, and it requires the participation of everyone in the economy. That's the short answer, and we can discuss it further if you have any questions.
Thank you, Noura. So let's open up the question from the floor.
I wanted to ask about this off-the-grid energy projects that you guys have been working on with solar panels and things like that. So it sounds like right now those projects are catering to a relatively low demand for energy, since they're in relatively impoverished communities. So as those communities develop and as the demand for energy increases, do you think those micro networks, I can't remember what you called them, but smaller sort of networks of energy, will that technology be able to keep up with that demand as communities grow? Or will more technology need to be, invented before we can get there?
Thank you. Yeah. So this idea of using, and there's a few terms, microgrid, mini-grid, some of these are used to describe an isolated power system that has its own generation. That if you can also actually have these connected to a grid that can interact with the grid if desired. So the capacity limitations on these to meet future growth is a real concern from a designer perspective, but that's actually the objective from the overall development perspective. You would like to find ways that the access to energy strengthens the economy, which leads to growth in energy demand. From a technology perspective, it is one good thing about renewables is that they're relatively modular, and so you can expand capacity to meet growing needs. we can get into a discussion maybe more technically after, but some of those you can't always expand linearly. Sometimes there are jumps and steps up. One of the key aspects of expansion when you have a lot of renewables is the ability to store energy. So the energy storage technology and how modular that is may constrain about how you expand capacity. But there are many options around how you would expand capacity, but I would say that there's no new invention needed to scale up microgrids. I would say one area that is a very active area of research is the interconnection of microgrids. And so how once microgrids interconnect, how is that coordinated? How is that designed into the original infrastructure for eventual interconnection? And even on the energy market side, how do energy markets respond to moving from isolated microgrids which may have their own energy market to now one that's coordinated and interactive? And that's also where the blockchain idea comes in to help with the financial transactions between microgrids. So there's a lot of work going on. I don't think there's a major technology constraint on the generation side for capacity expansion, but there's a lot of exploration for how that infrastructure evolves.
And if I may add, comparing renewable energy to conventional energy, where you have a huge power plant that's not very easy to replace and upgrade, solar panels are considered an end-of-pipe technology where you can just retrofit any building and you can replace any panel with another. And as was mentioned in the previous panel, solar energy technology is really moving very fast, and it's becoming cheaper and cheaper. And so I would say that with the expansion of increasing the capacity of renewables is rather easy and cheap.
Also, I understand this is either renewable energy or conventional energies, and many microgrid existing with kind of diesel generators, yes. But it's solar energy and other renewable energy can be integrated or as a hybrid and the microgrid.
Samia Dej from UNDP, Kuwait office. What I wanted to ask was about access to finance for innovations. In let's say in more developed countries, there's usually like government grants for R&D and prize money, etc. But also there's venture capital. Now I know in this region there is interest from VCs in investing in the IT sector. However, where's the issue with like renewables and innovations? I think this question is for Mr. Anis. Is it the lack of trust in the governance in the country, the lack of trust in regulations? Is the return on investment? Because it's been a major driver for innovation in Silicon Valley and in the States, in Europe, etc. However, I see in the Middle East it's not so impactful. Thank you.
So. Another question?
Yeah, can you?
So that I said, the problem is the problem of money also. So we can register a lack of money, but maybe we cannot today. And we are noting because we are under negotiation now with Tunisian local authority. So it's the first time maybe that Tunisian authority will invest in innovation launched and innovated in Tunisia. So maybe it's the first time, so we can register some wave of change. And we believe that it will become true thing.
Yeah, I would just add one comment on the innovation ecosystem, which requires that capital. It's probably easier to think of it at a city level than a country level. It's really cities that become a nucleus for that activity. Even in the U.S., where I'm in Boston, that's a very rich environment where you have all from the angel investor to the VCs to the institutional investors. But in other parts of the country, you have none of that. So I think there are going to be again, cities that become, that are already developing, that tap into models around incubators and would attract investors. Initially, as I mentioned before, I think those, some of the capital interest in there may be those that have a dual financial interest and a development interest in that region. So many times the diaspora community that has been involved in innovation elsewhere. I know in Somaliland there's an incubator that's starting up out of a group of diaspora from US and UK. So those familiar with those mechanisms, but with that extra interest in development of that region, I think they become really champions of creating that culture, but at the city level. I think to think of it at the country level is too broad for something like that.
I wondered, firstly, whether you felt that, and this is a question generally for the panel, innovators can leverage a sort of smaller investment for greater returns because of that sort of, at that early stage, or if the larger corporates that are now getting involved in sustainable development are the ones that will kind of act as the agents for change. So is change and are those revolutionary ideas going to come from the smaller innovators, or are they going to come from the more established corporates that are now getting involved?
I think the startup scene has really transformed in the region here in the Middle East, especially in the GCC, especially startups in energy. We saw yesterday the celebration of the signing of the Green Fund, which is amazing. There are several funds as well in Saudi, not specifically in energy, but in VCs in general. And so this is spurring innovation and spurring ideas and the creation of this new startup movement. So I would say that it has really transformed in the past years, and it's looking much better.
Why you innovate? So, innovation, it's not like a choice for us. It's not, we have two ways, for example, and we can take one of both. It's not like this. For our region, for our countries, developing countries, if you are not able today to innovate, it can be fatal for your country, for your people. So it's very, very high priority today for our countries, for our people to innovate, to survive. It's a question of survival, So, but the question for me, the most important question for me, just to switch with your question, is how we can innovate in this, with these barriers, with these problems, with this challenge. This is the problem. So you have a lack of money, you have problem of culture. So for that, you need an inspiration source. You need an inspiration source. I come from Tunisia. Tunisia is the ancient land of Carthage. And in our Carthaginian heritage, we have the great general Hannibal, who said during his conquest to Rome, he said a very, very good citation which can be an inspiration source for all innovators around the world. So he said, you shall either find a way or make one. So every day, daily, I am making my own way to attain my target, to attain my objectives, which is very simple. Today, we are pioneer maybe in research and development in wind energy field, but tomorrow, in few years, we will become a leader, inshallah.
I'd like to add that when we talk about innovation, we talk about the knowledge economy as well. So perhaps it's not a fair question to compare innovation, the innovation rate in the developed world to the innovation rate in the developing world. Innovation, in essence, answers to social problems. So I'm not sure if it's imitation to the problems, but we more or less share the same kind of social problems and the same kind of evolution from, going through the economic growth and the economic development the traditional pathway of economic development. So it has to do with the education level, it has to do with the industrial base of the country, it has to do with the governance, the stability, all of these things to create to cultivate a environment that spurs innovation. So it's good to aspire to become better, but it's important to tackle the idea of justice.
Can we take 2 more questions, then closing? She can go first.
Can I?
Oh, okay.
Okay. I have a question about innovation again and developing economies. Why is there not a focus on using less energy rather than more? We're always trying to innovate and say, well, do this, but we're going to show you how to use less power doing it, but why do it in the first place? Why are we being made to do new things rather than going back to older ways or reducing power usage rather than trying to do it differently? I'm personally an organic farmer from India, and I find a lot more people, trying to use less rather than, and they're happier using less as well, simplifying their lives, rather than making them look up to the developed countries. So, any comments on that?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I agree. I think the emphasis. So while I work in energy access, my metric of success is not necessarily number of connections or size of capacity or amount of energy generated. Our own philosophy is to try to, I would say when we look at designing energy systems, meet this new capability with the demand and the uses that are suitable for the local community that we're working with. So that's why actually for us we try to remove the role of a project developer from dictating what the system should look like, how big it should be, how it should be priced, into a collaborative process with the community that says, well, we could use some water pumping, we could use some, entertainment, and we're willing to pay this much. Let's just work that out so we know what is suitable at this current stage, and then we can design the system collaboratively. So I think a missing piece to be able to do this is when technology appears like a black box, and then the end user doesn't have any participation in the design of the system or understanding how it will impact them, it tends to be dictated from a developer who then may measure their success in number of connections and size of capacity installed. So I think it's the process by which you do the energy planning and working with communities, and if it's focused on the development side as opposed to just the infrastructure, then I think you can address some of those issues.
Can I take a final question?
I wanted to maybe touch upon 2 things to basically answer. I come from the One Institute from Jordan, so we're in a research policy think tank. So I might be better suited to actually answer why research and innovation has not been a priority, at least in Jordan. One of the biggest issues is funding. So priorities in Jordan do not lie on finding new ways to solve or find solutions. They are more inclined to fund implementation rather than finding new solutions. So let's say one of the major issues when we talk about energy or water innovations, they'd rather spend the money on finding ways to implement things fast and easy rather than having to wait for a long time and research and develop new ways to do it, which is a problem, I think. Secondly, on your idea on why renewable energy rather than energy efficiency, and that's a big thing we always talk about in Jordan and in the region. I think in Jordan, the trend of renewable energy has picked up. It's like a fashion. Nobody thinks about energy efficiency anymore, which is sad. And that's a big gap in our policy because investors, just like you said, are more inclined on wanting to invest more in renewable energy than energy efficiency, which basically drives our policies back home. And in developing countries, because we are mostly, sadly, donor-oriented rather than priority-oriented, this is what actually happens.
The last comment about donor-oriented as opposed to priority-oriented, like to just emphasize that. I think that's a good point. I think when the emphasis is on, dollars transacted through aid as opposed to meeting priorities, then you're pushing for more generation capacity and not assessing your priorities based on need. So yeah, thank you for that comment.
Maybe important to make energy efficiency also sexy as renewable energy, maybe. But thank you so much. And initially, it's difficult to summarize the discussion, but initially I thought it's discussion going to be quite a techy one. And then eventually turning up, it's more talking about how to create innovation culture and connecting people and between policymakers, funders, and the innovators, and also students. So that's probably the essence of how government should help and to create, more innovative cultures and driving the more invention for these regions. But thank you very much, and please join the thanks to our excellent panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.